My dear friends, my fellow lovers of literature and cinema, welcome back to our little corner where stories breathe, where images become poems and where sound becomes philosophy. Tonight, I want us to gather together as if around a small fire, not just to talk about a film but to let it sink into us, to let it echo against our own memories and philosophies, our own questions of family, of identity, of love and loss. And so, when I mention Lilo and Stitch 2025, I do so not as an ordinary introduction but as a kind of invocation, a summoning of the past and the present colliding. Because that's what this movie is for me, a spark that connects the innocence of childhood with the reflective distance of adulthood, a bridge across time itself. I remember vividly years ago when I first encountered the original animated tale. I wasn't even looking for it, it just appeared on the television one summer evening, almost by accident, like a stranger knocking on your door with a story to tell. And it stayed with me. A little girl who felt lonely, a creature who wasn't supposed to belong, and somehow, in that strangeness, a family was born. I didn't know at the time that it would lodge itself into my consciousness like a seed, waiting to bloom whenever I thought of what it means to be human, what it means to be seen, to be loved in spite of our sharp edges and strange forms. And now, as I sit here watching this new version, something stirs in me, a reminder of that summer evening but also a reminder of how stories can age with us, like friends who change but remain familiar. There's something both beautiful and unsettling about remakes, isn't there? They're like echoes, voices repeating the same melody across a canyon of years, sometimes distorted, sometimes clearer than the original. Disney has been experimenting with this echo chamber for a while now, reimagining the classics not just for nostalgia's sake but for a new audience. Children who will know these stories for the first time and adults who will revisit them with a mixture of delight and suspicion. What fascinates me is not whether a remake is faithful or whether it improves upon the original, but rather what it reveals about us, the viewers. Why do we need this story again? Why do we bring it back from memory into flesh and blood, pixels and performances? Perhaps because, in a fractured world, we keep seeking the reassurance of stories that tell us family is not always given, but sometimes chosen. That love, though fragile, is stronger than fear. That chaos can be a kind of music if only we listen closely. Watching this film, I found myself caught between two selves, the child who once believed that monsters could become brothers, and the adult who knows that life is not so generous, that wounds don't always heal, that sometimes the ones we love drift far from us. And yet, somewhere between these two selves, this film stitched a thread. It reminded me that even as adults we crave to be cared for with the same sincerity a child seeks. We long for bonds that transcend explanation, bonds that seem absurd at first glance but that make all the sense in the world once felt. Isn't that what literature does? Isn't that what cinema does? It makes the improbable believable, the unbelievable necessary. What strikes me most is how the story begins quietly, with the feeling of emptiness rather than fullness. We don't begin with celebration but with absence, with a little girl who feels the world doesn't quite hold space for her. That absence is what summons the other, the alien, the outcast. And isn't that just like life? Our loneliness is a kind of prayer, and sometimes the universe answers in the strangest ways. I find myself thinking of times in my own life when loneliness cracked open the door to the unexpected. A new friendship, a surprising kindness, an encounter that shifted the axis of my days. This film, in its opening, isn't really about adventure or spectacle, not yet. It's about the hollow space inside us, the one we desperately want filled, though we don't always admit it. But make no mistake, this isn't simply a sweet bedtime story wrapped in nostalgia. There is something rawer here, something darker beneath the bright island colors and playful energy. You can feel it in the way scenes linger a moment too long, in the way characters hesitate as if burdened by something invisible. It's as though the filmmakers wanted us to recognize that family is not a fairy tale, but a battlefield, messy, unpredictable, sometimes painful. Love here isn't painted as easy, it is stitched together out of fragments, misunderstandings, sacrifices, and even failures. And yet it endures. That's what makes it human. That's what makes it art. As the images unfolded before me, I kept thinking about how we read stories in literature classes, how professors would tell us that texts reveal more about the reader than about the writer. I believe films like this work the same way. When we watch them, we see not just a tale on screen but a mirror of our own longings. For me, it was a mirror reflecting the times I felt different, strange, like I didn't quite fit into the structure of family or society. And I wonder, for you, what will it reflect? Will you see yourself in the child, yearning to belong, or in the creature, desperate to be accepted despite your wildness? Or maybe you'll see yourself in the sister, bearing too much weight, struggling to keep life intact. The beauty of this film is that it doesn't insist on one answer. It simply lays out a mosaic, and we recognize ourselves in whichever shard of glass glitters most in our eyes. There is also a rhythm to the way the story sets itself up, a rhythm that feels like waves washing against the shore. It comes slowly at first, almost playfully, then stronger, carrying with it both joy and unease. That rhythm is essential because it mimics the heart of the story, the push and pull of chaos and order, of mischief and care, of destruction and love. It teases us with the promise of storms, but also with the reassurance that storms can pass. You sense that what's coming is not just conflict, but transformation. So let me tell you this without spoiling the details yet. The heart of this tale is not in the spectacle of alien worlds or wild adventures. It is in the quiet look exchanged between two unlikely beings, in the hesitation before reaching out a hand, in the tears that fall when words fail. It is in the courage to love something, or someone, that the world says cannot be loved. That's where the film lives, that's where it breathes. And as we go deeper into its plot, its characters, its symbols, I want you to remember that. Don't just look at the story as entertainment. Look at it as an allegory, as a parable, as a poem. Let it disturb you, let it soften you, let it remind you that even in our darkest strangeness, we can be chosen, we can be family. And so, my friends, as we step further into this journey together, I invite you not just to listen but to feel, not just to watch but to reflect. This isn't a review. This is an exploration, a conversation across time and memory. A story told once in animation, now told again in flesh and light, waiting for us to enter. I promise, the deeper we go, the more you will find echoes of your own life stitched into it. And maybe, just maybe, you'll come out the other side with a new understanding of what it means to be loved, fiercely and unconditionally, even when you feel most unlovable. The story begins with an air of quiet sadness, though it is wrapped in colors that appear cheerful on the surface. A small island community is introduced in fragments. Waves curling against the shore, the chatter of children running through narrow streets, the hum of family dinners where laughter sometimes feels more like a cover for silence. In the middle of all this, there is a little girl, restless, unpredictable, lonely in a way that feels almost too heavy for her size. She walks through life with a kind of defiance, but behind it lies a longing so deep it could split her heart open. This, I think, is the film's first act of courage. It doesn't hide her pain. It lets us see her as she is, not as she wants to be seen, and that vulnerability draws us in at once. Her home is not absent of love but heavy with responsibility. An older sister tries to hold the family together after loss has cracked it apart, and that weight seeps into every interaction. The two sisters clash constantly, one trying to act as mother and guardian, the other resisting, needing care but resenting the form it comes in. It is a dance of frustration but also of devotion. I find myself thinking here of how literature often portrays sibling bonds, complex, layered, capable of shifting between cruelty and tenderness in the same breath. Shakespeare had his battling brothers, the Brontes their tormented sisters. This film captures something similar in a modern setting, the paradox of being each other's only anchor and also each other's greatest storm. And then, far from the quiet rhythms of this island life, another thread unravels. A creature, crafted not by love but by science and violence, slips through the cracks of the universe. Its very existence is rebellion. It is built to destroy yet desperate to survive. Its arrival on the island is not neat or graceful. It crashes into this world like a fragment of nightmare lodged inside a dream. And yet, the way it wanders, confused and fierce, almost mirrors the girl's own wandering, a creature displaced, unwanted, searching for a place to rest. Their meeting is not presented as destiny with fireworks. It's awkward, chaotic, almost absurd. A girl trying to prove she is not as alone as she feels, and a being trying to hide from those who would erase it. She doesn't fully know what she's inviting into her life, and it doesn't fully understand what she is offering. But isn't that how many of our most important bonds begin? Not with clarity but with risk? Not with certainty but with a leap into the unknown? I felt in that moment a memory of my own. A friendship that started in misunderstanding, in strangeness, and grew into something that defined years of my life. That's the resonance this film manages. It reminds us that belonging often begins in disorder. From there, the rhythm of the film shifts into something playful, though always with shadows beneath. The girl tries to present her new companion as something ordinary, a pet, a friend, though it is anything but. Scenes of mischief unfold, furniture broken, rules bent, chaos stitched into daily routines. The community around them looks on with suspicion, sometimes with cruelty. And here the film holds up a mirror again. What do we do when confronted with the strange, the outsider, the one who doesn't fit our neat definitions? Do we reject? Do we punish? Or do we risk opening our arms? The sister's patience frays. She sees danger where the younger sees salvation. Their arguments burn hotter, louder, until the house itself feels fragile under their voices. Yet, beneath all this, something tender forms between girl and creature. Not in the grand gestures but in small, almost secret ways. A hand extended, a song shared, an unspoken recognition of loneliness in each other's eyes. The camera lingers on these moments as if to tell us, here is the heartbeat of the story. But danger doesn't stay distant. Those who created the creature are still searching, relentless, determined to erase what should not exist. Their presence in the narrative grows, casting a shadow over every moment of joy. You sense it even when nothing is happening, in the way the sky darkens a little too suddenly, in the way laughter cuts off just before silence swallows it. The stakes are no longer just personal, they are cosmic. This bond between girl and creature is not only questioned by her family and community but hunted by forces that see it as an error, an abomination. By now, the plot carries us through a series of set pieces that alternate between comedy and dread. The girl insists on normality, taking her new friend into spaces where it absolutely doesn't belong, forcing the community to confront it head-on. There are moments of laughter, yes, but also of cruelty, the outsider mocked, feared, pushed to the edge. And each time, the bond grows stronger, as if every rejection by the world tightens the thread between them. Midway through, the film reaches a kind of threshold. The girl and her sister, though still clashing, begin to recognize that they are bound by something larger than their grief. The sister sees glimpses of care in the creature's actions, glimpses that suggest it is not only chaos but also capable of love. Yet she is torn, caught between protecting her sibling and protecting their fragile home. The authorities close in. The island no longer feels like a safe place. And the girl, sensing this, clings tighter, not out of naivete but out of belief. Belief that love can tame even what was born for destruction. This, for me, is the brilliance of how the first half unfolds. It gives us laughter and tenderness, but always with a thread of unease woven through. You cannot watch it without feeling both hope and dread, both joy in the sense that it could all collapse in an instant. And isn't that the nature of love itself? Isn't that the nature of family? It is always on the edge of breaking, yet somehow, miraculously, it holds. By the time we approach the turning point, the girl and creature have become inseparable, not because they fit perfectly but because their broken edges match. The sister, though skeptical, begins to soften. The world outside grows harsher, more threatening. And just as we start to believe in the fragile peace they've carved out, the film shifts. The hunt draws closer, the shadows deepen, and the laughter begins to sound more like a memory than a present reality. And there the story leaves us, on the edge of something larger, something more dangerous. We are asked to hold our breath, to believe in what we've seen so far, but also to brace ourselves for what is coming. The tension that has been simmering beneath the surface finally begins to boil over. The fragile harmony between the girl, her sister, and the strange creature cannot hold against the weight of the outside world pressing in. We feel it first not in action but in atmosphere. The skies seem darker, the music carries sharper edges, the laughter of the earlier scenes has grown brittle, hollow. The sense of being hunted becomes almost unbearable. And then it breaks. The pursuers arrive not quietly but with force, their presence shattering the fragile home that had barely managed to stand under the weight of grief and conflict. The creature, once playful and mischievous, is suddenly revealed in the fullness of what it was designed to be, chaotic, powerful, terrifying. For the girl, this is both a test of loyalty and a shock of recognition. She sees not just her companion but the danger it poses. The island, too, begins to fracture under the strain. Neighbors who once looked away now point fingers, and the authorities who once hesitated now move with ruthless certainty. And yet, in the chaos, we witness something extraordinary. The creature, born for destruction, does not turn on the girl. Instead, it turns toward her, protecting her, standing between her and the world that wants to tear her apart. It is in these moments, when buildings crumble and sirens wail, that we see the paradox of its being most clearly, both monster and savior, both curse and blessing. I could not help but think of the monsters of literature, Frankenstein's creation, Grendel, even Milton's Satan, figures born to destroy who nevertheless carry the spark of something recognizably human. The sister, too, undergoes her transformation here. Her suspicion, her resentment, her constant exhaustion, suddenly they crystallize into something fiercer, love. She recognizes that her little sister's bond with the creature is not foolishness but faith. And though she fears it, though she does not fully understand it, she chooses to stand with them. Family, in that moment, stretches its definition once again. It is no longer confined to bloodlines or houses. It expands to include the one being everyone else wants to erase. The chase grows larger, more desperate. The island itself becomes a stage for pursuit. Beaches turn to battlegrounds, forests echoing with the sound of engines and alien technology. The little girl, clinging to the belief that love can hold, becomes both guide and shield. It is not that she is fearless. Her fear is plain, but that her courage outweighs it. And courage, as the story reminds us, is the only thing strong enough to resist forces bent on destruction. Midway through this second arc, the creature reaches a breaking point. Captured, restrained, displayed like evidence of sin, it is made small, smaller than we've ever seen it. The girl's heartbreak in this moment is unbearable. She sees not a monster in chains but a friend betrayed, a family member stolen. I felt my own chest tighten as I watched, remembering times when love seemed powerless, when someone I cared for slipped out of my hands, taken by circumstances larger than either of us could fight. That's the resonance here. It's not about aliens and battles. It's about helplessness, the universal pain of watching those we love suffer. But despair does not end the tale. What follows is defiance. The girl and her sister refuse to give in. Their loyalty, fierce and unyielding, sparks something even in those who once hunted. The lines between enemy and ally blur, and the story edges toward its climax not with the brute force of spectacle but with the quiet, devastating power of chosen love. The climax arrives in a storm of images, explosions of light, bodies colliding, desperate choices made in seconds that feel eternal. The creature, unleashed again, does not destroy aimlessly but acts with purpose, driven by its bond to the girl. The island, once a place of isolation, becomes a crucible of transformation. And just when it seems everything will collapse, when loss feels inevitable, the story pulls itself back from despair. The creature, against all odds, survives. The girl, though bruised and broken, does not let go. And the sister, once on the verge of losing her family completely, finds it reborn in a shape she never expected. The resolution is quieter than the chaos that precedes it, but no less powerful. We see the family, an unconventional one, stitched together out of pain and defiance, standing not triumphantly but tenderly. They are not perfect. They are not safe forever. But they are together. And that is enough. In literature we often call this a catharsis, the purging of fear and pity, the cleansing that comes after the storm. That is what this ending offers. Not a fairy tale where everything is mended, but a promise that love, fragile though it is, can endure even in the face of worlds that want to tear it apart. When the credits finally roll, it is not victory that lingers in the heart, but recognition. Recognition that monsters are not always what they seem, that family is not always what we are born into, and that love, once chosen, can transform even the most destructive of beings into something worthy of belonging. What lingers long after the story ends are not only the events but the faces, the voices, the peculiar ways each character carries their burden of love and loneliness. Characters are the vessels of meaning. They are the windows through which we experience the world, and in this film, they are drawn with such care that even their silences feel like monologues. I want to linger with them here, to sit beside each one as though in conversation, and allow their presence to tell us more than the plot ever could. The little girl remains at the center, her defiance and fragility stitched together so tightly that one cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. She is unruly, difficult, often misunderstood, and yet that is precisely why she feels so real. Too often, children in stories are painted as saints or caricatures, but here we see a child who aches, who lashes out, who loves clumsily. Watching her reminded me of my own younger self. The way loneliness twists into mischief, the way the hunger for love disguises itself as rebellion. She is not polished, but she is true, and that truth is what makes us root for her, even when her choices seem reckless. Her sister is a figure I kept returning to and thought long after the credits faded. Exhausted, overwhelmed, stretched between roles she never asked for, she embodies the quiet heroism of those who hold families together after tragedy. She is both mother and sister, authority and companion, and the strain of it threatens to break her. And yet, beneath her frustration, there is a tenderness that refuses to die. I think of her as the embodiment of resilience, though not the kind that looks glamorous. Hers is the resilience of weary mornings, of responsibilities accepted without applause, of love carried like a burden because no one else will. She represents a kind of character often overlooked in cinema, the caretaker who is not perfect, who resents the role at times, but who remains because love will not allow abandonment. And then there is the creature, Stitch, though I resist calling him merely a creature for he is so much more. He begins as chaos incarnate, a bundle of teeth and noise, something that seems incapable of tenderness. But slowly as the story unfolds, we realize that his chaos is not cruelty but confusion, that his destruction is not malice but instinct. What moves me most is how he mirrors the girl. Both seen as misfits, both longing to belong, both punished for simply existing as they are. In literature we often call this doubling, the way characters reflect one another to highlight their truths. Stitch is the girl's shadow and her twin. In his monstrousness she sees her own. And yet, as he learns to love, to care, to sacrifice, we realize that the monster is perhaps the most human of all. The supporting figures too are not without depth. The pursuers, though painted in broad strokes, carry with them the weight of order, of authority that cannot tolerate the unpredictable. They remind me of the forces in our own lives that try to smooth us into compliance, to erase our jagged edges. Their pursuit of Stitch is not simply about capturing an alien, it is about controlling what they do not understand, about silencing difference. In them, I see the teachers who told me to stop asking too many questions, the institutions that demanded I fit neatly into categories. They are not villains in the cartoonish sense but embodiments of fear, fear of the strange, fear of the uncontrollable. Even the community around the sisters plays its role. The neighbors who whisper, the authorities who threaten, the figures who stand at a distance but never truly help. These characters are the chorus, echoing the doubts and suspicions of society itself. They remind us that belonging is never only a private struggle but always a public negotiation. To belong is not just to be loved by one person but to be accepted, however reluctantly, by the world outside. And it is in this negotiation that the story's emotional weight presses hardest. What fascinates me most is how the film refuses to paint any of these characters as entirely one thing. The girl is not simply innocent, the sister not simply heroic, the creature not simply monstrous. They are all fractured, layered, contradictory. And isn't that what makes them feel alive? Isn't that what makes literature so powerful? The way it captures not only what people do but why they do it, and how their reasons often conflict with themselves. In this film, every character seems to carry two truths at once: love and resentment, fear and courage, chaos and tenderness. Watching them, I felt less like I was observing a story and more like I was being reminded of my own contradictions. By the time the story resolves, what stays with us are not the battles or the chases but the way these characters have shifted. The girl has not become polished or obedient, but she has discovered that her wildness is not a curse but a gift, one that allows her to love fiercely. The sister has not been freed of her burdens, but she has allowed herself to be vulnerable, to admit she cannot do it all alone. And Stitch, once defined only by destruction, has learned that his existence can be more than instinct, that he can choose love, choose family, choose to stay rather than flee. Together, they embody the film's central truth, that family is not about perfection but about endurance, about staying when everything else falls apart. When I think about these characters, I find myself moved not only by who they are but by what they remind us of. They remind us that love is messy, that belonging is fragile, and that even monsters can be worthy of care. They remind us that strength often looks like exhaustion, that rebellion can be another name for longing, that even the strangest bonds can become sacred. And most of all, they remind us that stories are not about flawless heroes but about broken beings who find one another and decide, against all odds, not to let go. Sometimes the beauty of cinema lies not only in what unfolds on the screen but in the stories whispered behind the curtain. The production of this film carries with it strange, almost secretive threads, details that feel like clues in a larger mystery, little quirks that remind us movies are made not by magic but by human hands fumbling toward art. I want to linger on some of these peculiarities, not as cold facts, but as fragments of narrative in themselves, each one revealing something about the nature of storytelling, about why this film feels the way it does. One of the strangest things, perhaps, is the sheer existence of this film. Who could have imagined, decades ago, that a quirky animated feature about a lonely girl and a mischievous alien would one day be translated into flesh and blood? Disney's choice to remake it was not inevitable, it was risky. The original is beloved but not a massive franchise, not a tale of princesses or superheroes. And yet, in this strangeness lies the film's uniqueness. It is not simply nostalgia that brought it back, but a cultural hunger for stories that blur the lines between family drama and cosmic absurdity. That hunger, I think, is what made the studio greenlight something that on paper might have looked bizarre. The casting itself carries unusual echoes. To see Alison Brie and Dave Franco not only share the screen but embody a story of love, loss, and strange companionship is peculiar in its own right, given their real-life marriage. There's a ghostly doubling here, actors playing roles that reflect, however faintly, the intimacy of their actual lives. It blurs the line between fiction and reality in a way that adds a strange electricity to their performances. When they look at each other on screen, it is difficult not to wonder how much of that gaze belongs to the character and how much to the human beneath the costume. That strangeness makes the film both richer and more unsettling, as though we are peeking at something too personal to be staged. And then there are the behind-the-scenes quirks. The creature itself, so central to the film, was brought to life not by one method but by an almost Frankensteinian combination: animatronics, puppetry, and digital effects layered together. In some scenes, a team of puppeteers crouched out of frame, moving ears and jaws with invisible strings. In others, animators painstakingly adjusted digital fur so it caught the light just right. The result is that Stitch feels uncanny, caught between the tactile and the digital. That uncanniness is not a flaw, it's a feature. It mirrors the story's own tension: something alien made to feel human, something monstrous rendered lovable. The strangeness of the technique becomes part of the strangeness of the character. Even the filming locations carried peculiarities. Though the story is set in Hawaii, many scenes were filmed in Australia with beaches dressed up to mimic tropical shores. There's a surreal quality to this: landscapes pretending to be other landscapes, actors pretending to be other people, a creature pretending to be real. Cinema itself becomes a hall of mirrors. And yet, this dislocation works on a thematic level. A story about belonging and displacement was filmed in places that themselves had to pretend to belong. It is as though the film's very production was enacting its central theme. Some of the strangest facts are almost playful. On set, the animatronic version of Stitch apparently malfunctioned more often than not: ears twitching at the wrong moments, jaws locking mid-snarl, eyes blinking out of sync. Rather than being discarded, these mishaps sometimes made it into the film, adding a layer of unpredictability that made the character feel even more alive. What was meant as failure became a kind of magic. Isn't that true of life too? The moments that go wrong, the awkward stumbles, often end up giving us the memories we cherish most. Then there is the music. Cornell Wilczek's score, rooted in a distorted love song stretched and warped, carries with it an eerie origin. The idea, reportedly, was born not from a grand orchestral plan but from the composer humming absent-mindedly in his studio, then feeding that simple tune into software that bent it beyond recognition. The strangeness here is almost philosophical. A love song that once might have played at a wedding becomes the soundtrack for chaos, loneliness, and alien longing. It is as though love itself had been mutated, reshaped into something monstrous and tender all at once. The production was also haunted not by ghosts but by interruptions. Weather delays on set were constant, with storms rolling in unexpectedly, forcing shoots to halt and entire schedules to be rewritten. At one point, a key sequence was nearly abandoned because the sea itself refused to calm. This strangeness, I think, is fitting. How could a story about chaos and unpredictability have been made under neat, orderly conditions? The weather itself seemed determined to participate, to remind the filmmakers that art is always at the mercy of forces larger than us. Even the audience reception carries peculiarities. Some viewers reported that children were more frightened by the live-action Stitch than expected, his realism tipping into the uncanny valley. Others, however, found themselves strangely moved, as though the rawness of his appearance made the story more urgent, more believable. This divergence in reaction is fascinating. It reveals how strangeness does not land the same way for everyone. For some, it is terror; for others, tenderness. For most of us, it is both at once. The final strangeness I cannot ignore is the way this film resonates with the current moment in culture. In a world increasingly fragmented, with families scattered, with belonging feeling precarious, this story of chosen family feels almost prophetic. The fact that it emerged now, in this year, with these actors and this creative team, feels uncanny, as if the film itself were responding to an invisible demand. It is strange not because it was planned that way but because stories often arrive when we most need them, and we are left to marvel at the coincidence. So when I think of the strangest facts about this movie, I do not think only of production mishaps or casting curiosities. I think of how the strangeness itself mirrors the tale being told. A story about a family stitched together from fragments was itself stitched together from scattered filming locations, unpredictable weather, malfunctioning puppets, and music born from distortion. It is almost as though the universe conspired to make the making of the film a reflection of its meaning. And that, to me, is the strangest fact of all, that art and life often mirror each other so closely, we cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. When we step back from the immediacy of plot and instead linger on the events themselves, something remarkable emerges. Each major moment in this story is not just a beat in a sequence but a kind of meditation, a gesture toward larger truths about love, alienation, and what it means to be human. To view the film critically is to realize that its events are less about spectacle and more about allegory, each scene a page in a fable that insists on being taken seriously even when dressed in comedy or chaos. Consider first the event of arrival, the moment when the creature crashes into the island's quiet world. On the surface, it is simply an action set piece, the collision of two worlds, the ordinary and the extraordinary. But critically it is much more. It is disruption personified. It is the narrative's way of showing us that loneliness is not just a private ache, it is an opening through which the strange may enter. The girl's solitude summons this arrival. In literature we often encounter this pattern, a protagonist's emptiness calling forth something magical or monstrous. Think of Jane Eyre meeting Rochester in the middle of a storm, or Victor Frankenstein's life unraveling when his creation comes alive. In each case the event is both external and internal, a reflection of inner need. Here too the creature's arrival is not random, it is an echo of the girl's longing. The next critical event is the forging of the bond. This is not done neatly or romantically, it is messy, disruptive, punctuated by chaos. Scenes of destruction in the home, furniture splintering, neighbors complaining, rules shattered, are not mere comedy but allegory. They tell us that love is not tidy, that connection often breaks the very structures we thought were secure. The critical insight here is that family is not built by order but by survival. In the rubble of broken walls and the echoes of shouted arguments, something more enduring forms. The bond between girl and creature is born not out of harmony but out of shared misfit status, out of chaos recognized and embraced. Another event that demands critical reflection is the pursuit, the relentless hunt by those who see the creature as nothing more than an error to be corrected. On screen it is thrilling, chase sequences, near escapes, the menace of authority looming closer. But critically, it is an exploration of how society responds to difference. The creature is not hunted for crimes committed but for its very being. It is pursued because it does not conform, because it exists outside the order imposed by others. This event, then, becomes a parable about exclusion, about the violence of conformity. We see in it echoes of countless literary and historical examples, witch hunts, inquisitions, purges, moments when the strange and different were crushed because they unsettled the norm. In that light, the pursuit is not simply suspense, it is tragedy. The capture sequence, too, is layered with meaning. To watch the creature shackled, diminished, stripped of agency, is to confront the brutality of power. But the true weight of this event is not in the chains but in the gaze of the girl. Her heartbreak transforms the spectacle into critique. We see, through her eyes, that what has been imprisoned is not a monster but a being capable of love. Critically, this moment reframes monstrosity, not as a condition of the one chained but of the ones doing the chaining. The captors become the villains not because they are evil in some melodramatic sense but because they are blind, incapable of seeing the humanity in what is strange. That blindness is the true violence. The climax itself, the moment of defiance, of chaos turned into protection, invites another layer of critical reading. Here we see the creature unleashed, power radiating in every gesture. Yet instead of confirming its nature as destroyer, the story twists. The creature chooses to protect, to love, to stay rather than flee. This is the most radical act of all. In literature, the monster often confirms the fears of its creators. It becomes the threat they always assumed it would be. But here the monster refuses that script. It writes its own story, one in which chaos bends toward care. That refusal is the film's most subversive gesture, and critically, it transforms the climax into more than action. It becomes a declaration. Love is not the absence of power but the redirection of it. Finally, the resolution. The family standing together, not perfect but intact. This event is quiet compared to what precedes it, yet critically it may be the most important. For it refuses closure in the traditional sense. Problems are not solved. The world is not convinced. The authorities are not fully appeased. And yet, in spite of this, family exists. That refusal of neatness is itself a critical statement. Life is never tied up with bows. Love is never immune to threat. Family is always provisional, always precarious. But that is what makes it real. To demand perfection would be to demand a lie. By ending with imperfection, the film insists on truth. When critics look at films, they often search for themes, for resonance, for the ways events ripple outward beyond the screen. Here, those ripples are undeniable. The arrival is not just about aliens but about loneliness. The bond is not just about friendship but about chaos and belonging. The pursuit is not just about action but about conformity and exclusion. The capture is not just about suspense but about the violence of blindness. The climax is not just about spectacle but about rewriting the script of monstrosity. And the resolution is not just about survival but about redefining family. What makes this story so impactful is precisely that its events operate on multiple levels at once. They entertain, yes, they thrill, they make us laugh, they make us gasp. But they also teach. They also challenge. They also wound. Watching them unfold, I could not help but think of my own life. Of moments when I felt hunted for being different, of bonds forged in chaos, of love that felt like defiance. That is the gift of cinema at its best. It makes our private pains feel part of something larger, part of a shared human narrative. And so, when I consider these events critically, I do not see only a children's tale dressed up in live action. I see a myth retold for a world that desperately needs it. I see a story that insists monsters can love, that families can be chosen, that love is worth the chaos it brings. These are not just events in a movie. They are parables for our time. And perhaps that is why this film lingers, because its critical weight is not in the spectacle of aliens or the charm of mischief, but in the way its events remind us of what it means to belong, what it means to stay, what it means at last to love. Sometimes the story of a film is written not only in its script but in the sweat and stumbling that happen behind the camera. What fascinates me about this project is how the making of it almost feels like a parallel tale, another narrative stitched together from trial, accident, and flashes of creativity that no one could have predicted. To explore the production is to walk into a workshop where art and chaos dance together, where the accidents often matter just as much as the plans. One of the most striking insights is how carefully the film's team balanced realism with imagination. Stitch, the heart of the story, could not be created through a single method. Digital effects alone would have made him glossy, untouchable. Puppetry alone might have made him stiff, comical. The team chose strangeness instead, animatronics layered with digital enhancement, sometimes even puppeteers crouched out of frame, their hands guiding ears or eyes. There's something oddly poetic about that, an alien built by human hands, imperfect and unpredictable, later polished by invisible code. The creature that is neither entirely real nor entirely artificial mirrors the very theme of the movie, being caught between worlds, belonging to both yet fully to neither. Filming locations tell their own story. Although the narrative sings of Hawaii, many key sequences were shot on the coasts of Australia. Beaches had to be dressed with tropical vegetation, skies digitally adjusted, sand sculpted to pass as island terrain. The displacement is uncanny. A film about outsiders not quite belonging was itself shot in landscapes pretending to be something else. Even geography became performance. That irony is delicious, the film's production echoing its themes in ways no one could have fully planned. The cast too brought with them peculiar dynamics. Alison Brie and Dave Franco, married in real life, carried their intimacy onto the set. Though they were not cast as lovers in the story, their natural familiarity infused scenes with a layer of comfort and unspoken history. Sometimes watching them, you sense an affection that doesn't quite fit the characters but that nonetheless deepens the film's atmosphere. It's as if the real relationship haunts the fictional one, a ghost that enriches the performances. This is one of those strange gifts that production sometimes offers. When life and art overlap, even unintentionally, the film gains new texture. But it wasn't all magic. Reports of endless delays caused by weather haunted the set. Torrential rains appeared on days when skies were scripted to be clear. Winds toppled equipment in the middle of key scenes. More than once, entire shooting schedules had to be rearranged because the sea refused to cooperate. What could have been disaster became, oddly enough, an advantage. The unpredictability of nature lent authenticity to the story. Stormy skies in the background matched the emotional storms of the characters. Waves crashing harder than expected underscored the chaos of Stitch's presence. Reality intruded, and instead of resisting it, the filmmakers allowed it to bleed into the film. That flexibility, the willingness to let accidents shape art, is, I think, one of the reasons the film feels so alive. One fun fact that still amuses me is how often the animatronic Stitch misbehaved. His ears twitched at the wrong times, his mouth locked mid-growl, his eyes blinked when they were supposed to stay open. Instead of erasing all these flaws in post-production, the team kept some of them in. The result is that Stitch sometimes seems even more alive because of his mistakes. Isn't that a strange metaphor for life itself? That we are lovable not in spite of our glitches but because of them? The production's choice to embrace imperfection mirrors the narrative's embrace of misfits. It's one of those small decisions that becomes a quiet stroke of genius. The music carried its own curious journey. Composer Cornell Wilczek did not begin with grand orchestral sweeps but with something humble, a love song hummed in a studio. That tune was fed into software, stretched, twisted, distorted, until it became unrecognizable, a warped echo of affection that pulsed with unease. The strangeness of this process fascinates me. A simple melody of love mutated into a soundtrack for chaos and longing. It is as though the music itself underwent the same journey as the creature, beginning in tenderness, passing through distortion, arriving in a place both monstrous and moving. Even interactions on set carried their fun contradictions. Cast members reportedly found themselves bonding most during the toughest shooting days, when exhaustion stripped away pretenses. Long hours under the sun, malfunctions that forced endless retakes, storms that delayed work. These trials became the glue. What the story preaches on screen, the production lived off screen. Family is not made in comfort but in endurance. There's a peculiar poetry to that, almost as if the film was determined to teach its lesson to the people making it as much as to the people watching it. The editing process had its share of peculiarities too. Early cuts of the film reportedly leaned more heavily into comedy, with mischief dominating the first half. But as the edit evolved, more emphasis was placed on loneliness, grief, and the shadows beneath the laughter. This tonal recalibration changed the film dramatically. It's a reminder that films are not born fully formed but sculpted, sometimes reshaped entirely in post-production. The film we now see is not just the result of what was shot but of decisions made months later in dim editing rooms, where pacing and silence were wielded as carefully as dialogue and spectacle. Another strange but telling detail is how some extras in crowd scenes were actual locals, not trained actors. Their reactions to Stitch, wide eyes, nervous laughter, were genuine, sometimes caught off guard by the unpredictable animatronics. That authenticity bleeds into the film. You sense that the world around the main characters is not entirely staged, that there are glimpses of real people encountering something strange and unexpected. It adds texture, grounding the fantastical story in a grain of reality. What I love most about these production stories is how they echo the film's own message. A movie about imperfection, about chaos embraced, was itself made under imperfect conditions. Animatronics failed. Weather betrayed. Editing shifted the heart of the story. Yet out of all this came something cohesive, something resonant. The accidents became part of the design. The strangeness became part of the beauty. It is as though the production itself insisted on embodying the film's theme. That family, that art, that love, are not about smooth perfection but about stitching together fragments into something whole. So when we watch the final film, we are not just seeing a polished product. We are seeing the ghosts of storms that delayed it, the twitch of an animatronic ear that refused to behave, the laughter of extras who weren't supposed to break character but couldn't help themselves. We are seeing the hum of a simple melody distorted into something haunting. We are seeing the lives of actors who brought their real love into fictional roles. We are seeing 100 accidents woven into coherence. And that, I think, is what makes the film breathe. Its fun facts are not trivia to be forgotten but pieces of its soul, reminders that art is always stranger, messier, and more human than we imagine. Every story needs a home, and sometimes that home is as much a character as any figure on screen. The setting of this film is not a mere backdrop but a living pulse, a landscape that breathes with the characters, shaping their choices, amplifying their emotions, reminding us that environment and identity are inseparable. To linger on the settings is to realize how carefully the film builds a world that is both real and surreal, both ordinary and otherworldly, always inviting us to see more than surface beauty. The island is the first presence we feel even before the characters. Its skies are painted in gradients of blue and gold, its beaches curl against restless waters, its streets hum with the small rituals of community life. Yet beneath this postcard exterior lies an undercurrent of solitude. The girl's loneliness is amplified by the expansiveness of her surroundings, the way the horizon stretches endlessly, the way the waves repeat their rhythm with indifference. In literature, settings often mirror characters' inner states, and here the island mirrors both abundance and absence. It is beautiful but it is also isolating. Paradise, the film quietly suggests, can also be prison if one's heart is restless. Within this larger landscape, the home itself becomes central. A house that is neither entirely broken nor entirely whole, patched together with effort and exhaustion, embodies the family's fragility. Its walls are not pristine, its furniture not glamorous, but it shelters love that refuses to die. The scenes within it are intimate, cluttered, chaotic, plates unwashed, clothes piled, arguments echoing through narrow rooms. Yet in this imperfection lies authenticity. The home does not stand as an idyllic haven but as a battlefield where love is tested daily. And because of this, it feels alive. Then there is the intrusion of the alien, the strangeness of Stitch against these familiar backdrops. To see this creature against sunlit beaches and humble kitchens is to feel the collision of worlds. The island's natural beauty highlights his oddity, while the house's fragility emphasizes his destructive energy. The setting, in other words, is not neutral. It intensifies the tension, reminding us constantly that he does not belong, that the world around him will never fully contain him. And yet, in time, those same settings seem to soften, to absorb his presence, to adapt. By the end, the island does not erase his difference but accommodates it, just as the family does. Cinematography deepens this dialogue between setting and story. Wide shots of beaches and skies emphasize the smallness of the characters, their struggles dwarfed by nature's vastness. Close-ups, by contrast, bring us into their intimacy, the tremble of a lip, the flicker of an eye, the twitch of Stitch's ear. The contrast between scale reminds us of the paradox of existence. We are tiny against the cosmos, yet immense in the depth of our emotions. The film's visual rhythm alternates between these poles, giving us both grandeur and intimacy, both spectacle and sincerity. Lighting, too, plays a subtle role. Daylight scenes bathe us in warmth, in a deceptive sense of calm, while evening sequences draw long shadows across the home. Storms erupt at key moments, nature itself becoming a reflection of inner turmoil. One cannot help but recall the literary tradition of pathetic fallacy, nature echoing human emotion. When the girl feels despair, the skies darken. When the family begins to heal, sunlight filters softly through windows. These choices are not accidental. They are visual metaphors woven into the fabric of the film. Even the soundscape works with setting to create mood. The rustle of trees, the crash of waves, the hum of cicadas at dusk. All are amplified to remind us that this is not a sterile stage but a living environment. Against these natural sounds, the alien noises of Stitch, growls, screeches, mechanical whirs of the technology that hunts him, become even more jarring. The sound design thus emphasizes difference. The organic against the artificial, the familiar against the uncanny. It is another way the film reminds us of belonging and alienation. Symbolically, the settings carry deeper meanings. The beach, where land meets sea, functions as a liminal space, a threshold between safety and danger, between belonging and exile. It is on the beach that some of the most critical confrontations occur, and it is on the beach that resolutions are suggested. The home, by contrast, represents both fragility and resilience, a place always on the verge of collapse yet never fully destroyed. And the forest, with its shadows and secrets, becomes a metaphor for the unknown, for the parts of ourselves we fear yet must face. What strikes me most is how these settings refuse to remain static. They change as the characters change. The house that once felt suffocating becomes, by the end, a sanctuary. The island that once seemed indifferent becomes a place of belonging. Even the beaches that bore witness to conflict become places of reconciliation. In this way, the environment mirrors growth, as though the land itself were learning alongside the characters. Cinematically, the film does not shy away from using contrast to enhance mood. Bright tropical colors clash with the darker hues of pursuit, creating visual tension. The playful movements of the camera during scenes of mischief shift abruptly into stillness during moments of grief, forcing us to sit with discomfort. Editing, too, serves the setting, lingering on wide shots of the ocean to give us breath, then cutting rapidly through chase sequences to steal that breath away. These techniques remind us that setting is not passive. It dictates how we feel, when we breathe, when we panic, when we hope. And perhaps the most striking element is how ordinary spaces, kitchens, bedrooms, streets, are elevated into sites of myth. To see an alien sitting awkwardly at a dinner table or breaking furniture in a small living room is to witness the intrusion of the extraordinary into the mundane. This is the essence of the story. That family, that love, is not about grand stages but about ordinary spaces made sacred by connection. The setting teaches us that even the humblest home can hold universes of meaning if love resides there. So when I think of the cinematic elements of this film, I do not think only of cameras and lenses. I think of the way the island breathes with the characters, the way shadows mirror grief, the way sound makes the familiar strange. I think of how the film insists that setting is never backdrop but participant, never scenery but soul. And I realize in that recognition, that the island and the home are not simply where the story happens. They are part of the story itself, carrying its meaning as deeply as any line of dialogue or turn of plot. There is always something enchanting about peeling back the curtain of a film. We watch the finished story and feel the emotions it gives us, But the stories whispered between takes, the struggles hidden under perfect frames, carry their own power. Behind the camera, a different kind of narrative plays out, one full of accidents, camaraderie, frustrations, and little triumphs that never make it to the credits. With this film, those behind-the-scenes moments are as telling as anything that happens in the plot, because they reveal how fragile and miraculous the act of making cinema truly is. One of the most surprising insights is how collaborative the atmosphere was. Though the production was large, with Disney's resources humming in the background, much of the work felt intimate, almost like a community theater project scaled up. Actors spoke often of long hours where improvisation shaped performances, where laughter on set softened exhaustion, where even mistakes were embraced as potential gifts. It wasn't a machine grinding toward profit. At times, it felt more like a family tentatively learning how to exist together. This is strange but fitting. After all, the story itself is about chosen families stitched together from chaos. It's almost as if the film insisted its own making reflect that truth. Take, for instance, the creation of Stitch. The animatronic puppet was notoriously temperamental. Crew members joked that it had moods, sometimes playful, sometimes stubborn. There were days when scenes had to be delayed because its head wouldn't tilt properly or its jaw refused to open. Yet, far from becoming a curse, these mishaps created camaraderie. Puppeteers and actors worked side by side, laughing at the absurdity of talking to a machine with a mind of its own. That laughter bled into performances. When you see the girl giggle awkwardly at Stitch's twitching ears, know that much of it wasn't acting at all, it was Alison Brie breaking character, amused by the unpredictable machine in front of her. What could have been frustration turned into authenticity. Weather too played a curious role. Entire days were lost to sudden storms, equipment battered by winds that refused to calm. At one point, a critical beach sequence was postponed 3 times before the skies relented. For the crew it was maddening. Yet, when the footage was finally captured, something extraordinary had happened. The sea, restless from the storm, carried a rawness that no special effects could have faked. Waves crashed harder, clouds lingered heavier, and the result was a setting infused with tension. Nature itself became a silent collaborator, sculpting the mood of the film. The crew joked that the island was a co-director, unwilling to let them get away with anything easy. The actors carried their own burdens. Alison Brie spoke about the challenge of balancing comedy with heartbreak. On some days, she admitted, she went home unsure if she had found the right tone. Her vulnerability resonated with the crew, many of whom confessed to feeling the same. Dave Franco, wearing both producer and actor hats, was often seen running from set to meetings, then back into costume, his exhaustion hidden under professionalism. The strangeness of watching a husband and wife team juggle personal life and professional chaos gave the production a layer of intimacy no outsider could fully understand. Those who witnessed it felt they were part of something rawer than ordinary filmmaking. Even smaller interactions on set carried surprising weight. Extras who played townsfolk often whispered afterward that they felt genuinely part of the story. They weren't always handed detailed direction. Sometimes they were told simply to react. And when Stitch's animatronics misfired or the child actor improvised a line, those reactions were unscripted. Their wide eyes, startled gasps, bursts of laughter, they were real, captured in the moment. Behind the scenes, this meant long hours of wrangling chaos, but on screen it translates into authenticity. What we read as atmosphere was often just real people, caught off guard by strangeness. The director, Michael Shanks, encouraged this looseness. Rather than insisting on rigid precision, he often told the crew to let the accident breathe. A spilled drink, a misplaced prop, a sudden gust of wind, none were erased immediately. Instead, they were filmed, sometimes reincorporated into scenes. This philosophy of embracing imperfection shaped the film in profound ways. It blurred the line between control and chaos, between plan and accident, until the making of the film itself mirrored its themes. But not all behind-the-scenes stories are poetic. Some were simply human. There were moments of tension, of fatigue. Crew members clashed when deadlines loomed, when technology failed, when the pressure of a blockbuster hung heavy. There were arguments over tone, debates over editing choices, heated discussions about how much darkness the story should carry. Yet, what matters most is that these conflicts were not destructive but productive. Out of disagreement came clarity. Out of exhaustion came solidarity. The family formed on set was no smoother than the family on screen, but it was real. Perhaps my favorite behind-the-scenes image is of the cast and crew gathering at the end of long days, sitting together with food, sharing stories, laughing at disasters that only hours earlier had felt catastrophic. In those quiet circles, Away from cameras and lights, the film's message lived. They were strangers pulled together by circumstance, enduring storms and malfunctions, yet refusing to let go of one another. That is the truest behind-the-scenes insight, that a film is not just images stitched together, but people holding one another up until the story can stand. So when we watch this movie, we see more than plot and characters. We see fragments of laughter behind takes, storms that interrupted schedules, machines that refused to cooperate, and friendships forged in exhaustion. We see a production that was not smooth or perfect but stitched together with resilience. And in that realization, the film becomes more than entertainment. It becomes testimony. Testimony that art is never born from control alone but from the messy, human, unpredictable dance of people trying, failing, laughing, and trying again. Every story, beneath its surface, carries a hidden architecture. Themes are the beams and foundations we don't always see, and symbolism is the language whispered between the lines. In this film, both work together to build something that feels larger than the tale of a girl and her unlikely companion. To linger on its themes is to realize that it is not simply a children's story, nor simply a spectacle of science fiction, but a meditation on love, family, and the fragile beauty of belonging. The first theme that sings through every frame is family as choice. This is not the kind of family that is neat, inherited, or protected by tradition. It is a family stitched from broken pieces, from arguments, from misunderstandings, from an alien who by all logic should not belong. The film insists that love is not about perfection but about staying, about choosing to remain even when everything feels unbearable. The repeated arguments between sisters, the chaos of Stitch's mischief, the exhaustion of responsibility, none of these are signs of failure. They are signs of reality. And the symbolism here is powerful. The house, patched and imperfect, stands as metaphor for the family itself. Its cracks do not destroy it, they reveal its endurance. Closely tied to this is the theme of otherness and belonging. Stitch embodies the outsider, the one who doesn't fit, who frightens others by existing differently. His very design as a weapon makes him suspect. Yet the girl sees him not as a monster but as a mirror of her own strangeness. This is where symbolism breathes most strongly. Stitch is not just an alien, he is the embodiment of anyone who has been rejected for being different. He is queerness, he is displacement, he is grief, he is all the strange shapes of humanity that society would rather erase. And in his eventual acceptance, we see the possibility of love that transcends fear. The symbolism of the alien, a classic in literature and film, is here sharpened into a reflection of our own loneliness. Another theme pulsing through the narrative is chaos and order. Stitch is chaos incarnate, while the sister is the voice of order, trying to hold together a life that constantly threatens to collapse. Their clash is not just comedic but philosophical. Can love exist when one side destroys what the other builds? Can family endure when one thrives on mischief and the other on rules? The answer the film offers is not a victory for either side but a reconciliation. Love does not erase chaos, nor does it enforce rigid order. Love finds a way to weave both into harmony. The repeated motif of destruction followed by repair, broken furniture patched together, relationships shattered and then mended, symbolizes this cycle. The film tells us that life is not about eliminating chaos but about enduring it together. Grief is another theme that haunts the film quietly but persistently. The absence of parents is never far from view, shaping the sisters' interactions, pressing into the silences. Their home is not just physically cluttered, it is emotionally haunted. Every argument between them is laced with the grief of what has been lost. Every attempt at control is a way of fending off despair. Symbolism here is subtle. The empty chairs at dinner, the way the house feels too big for them, the constant sense of something missing. These details remind us that the story is not just about aliens but about how loss shapes love. Grief, in this world, is the soil from which strange new bonds can grow. There is also the theme of identity as transformation. Stitch begins as a creature of destruction, his very DNA coded for violence. Yet through love he learns choice. The symbolism of his transformation is striking. The weapon becomes companion, the monster becomes family. This speaks to a larger truth, that identity is not fixed but fluid, that even the roles we are born into can be rewritten by the act of love. Every time Stitch chooses not to destroy, every time he hesitates before lashing out, he embodies the possibility of becoming something new. This theme resonates far beyond the film. It whispers that none of us are doomed to remain what the world labels us. Even the island itself participates in the symbolism. The beach is the threshold between belonging and exile, the forest is the shadowed unknown, the home is the fragile heart. These settings are not just locations but metaphors. The ocean in particular functions as a symbol of both threat and possibility. It is vast, indifferent, dangerous, yet also beautiful and open. To live on its shore is to constantly face both fear and wonder. This mirrors the characters' lives, caught between despair and hope, danger and love. The final theme I cannot ignore is love as defiance. Love in this story is not sentimental sweetness, it is rebellion. To love Stitch is to defy authority, to defy the community, to defy even common sense. It is to say, I will choose the one you reject, I will hold the one you fear. In this way, love becomes political, radical, transformative. Symbolism reinforces this. Every time the girl chooses Stitch, she is symbolically choosing all outsiders, all strangeness, all that society labels as unworthy. The film reminds us that love is not just a feeling but an act of courage, a refusal to let fear dictate our bonds. What fascinates me most is how these themes overlap. Family, otherness, chaos, grief, identity, defiance. They are not separate threads but woven together into a tapestry. You cannot pull one without tugging on the others. And that is the brilliance of the story. It doesn't preach themes one at a time but allows them to flow through each event, each symbol, each frame. When I reflect on it critically, I realize that this is why the film lingers. It's not the spectacle of aliens or the charm of mischief that stays with us, but the recognition that we, too, are stitched together from chaos and longing. We, too, are outsiders seeking family. We, too, carry grief that shapes our love. We, too, transform when someone chooses us despite our sharp edges. And we, too, know that love, fragile though it is our most radical act. So the themes and symbols here are not ornaments. They are the soul of the story. They whisper to us that family is not given but chosen, that monsters can become human, that grief can seed new love, that chaos can coexist with care, and that love itself is the bravest form of rebellion. To see these truths on screen is to be reminded of them in our own lives, to recognize that even in our strangeness, even in our brokenness, we are not alone. Cinema is never just story, it is craft, a weaving of choices so subtle we sometimes forget we are being guided. What fascinates me about this film is how deliberate every technical decision feels, how much the filmmaker's trusted style to carry meaning alongside dialogue. To look at its filmmaking techniques is to realize how every frame, every cut, every note of sound was sculpted to mirror the themes of chaos, belonging, and love. And alongside that artistry lies the very real question of the box office, how this fragile, tender story fared in the brutal market of global cinema. Cinematography is perhaps the first technique to strike us. The camera often alternates between sweeping, almost postcard-like vistas of the island and intimate, trembling close-ups of the characters. This contrast mirrors the film's heart, the tension between vast loneliness and small, fragile bonds. When we see the girl framed against the endless ocean, we feel her isolation. When we cut suddenly to her face, eyes glistening, we are pulled into her private world. This oscillation between distance and intimacy reminds us constantly of the paradox of human existence. Tiny against the cosmos, yet infinite in the depth of feeling. Lighting plays a crucial role as well. Daylight sequences glow with deceptive warmth, emphasizing the tropical paradise that masks deeper fractures. But when grief or chaos takes center stage, the film leans into shadows, letting darkness pool in corners, letting storms carve menace across the screen. Symbolically, the light becomes an externalization of mood, warmth when love emerges, gloom when despair dominates. One could call this technique simple, but simplicity here is powerful. It teaches us to read atmosphere as emotion. Editing, too, becomes language. Early sequences are cut with brisk energy, reflecting the chaos Stitch brings into daily life. Objects breaking, neighbors shouting, laughter erupting unexpectedly. But as the story deepens, editing slows. Shots linger longer, silences stretch, transitions soften. This shift in rhythm teaches us to breathe differently, to feel the weight of grief and the tenderness of love. Editing is not just pacing, it is emotion sculpted through time. Sound design deserves equal attention. The natural world hums constantly, the rustle of palm leaves, the ceaseless crash of waves, the chatter of community life. Against this backdrop, Stitch's sounds, growls, screeches, mechanical echoes, become jarring reminders of his alienness. And yet, as the story progresses, his noises soften, blending into the soundscape until they no longer jar but harmonize. This auditory journey mirrors his transformation from monster to family. Even silence is used as a tool. Moments when music drops away leave us trembling, reminded that quiet can sometimes scream louder than any score. Speaking of score, Cornell Wilczek's music is itself a technique of storytelling. Built from the distortion of a simple love song, it carries the paradox of tenderness and unease. Strings stretch beyond comfort, chords bend at angles that unsettle, yet underneath we sense warmth. It is music as metaphor, the sound of love warped by grief, of chaos bent toward care. The score does not decorate the story, it interprets it, insisting we feel the contradictions rather than escape them. Performance techniques add another layer. The actors resist melodrama. The girl's rebellion feels sharp but authentic. The sister's exhaustion never theatrical but weary in ways we recognize. Stitch's chaos played partly through malfunctioning animatronics that were embraced rather than erased. This restraint grounds the fantastical narrative in realism, making us believe in aliens and family drama at the same time. The technique of embracing imperfection, allowing improvisation, letting accidents remain, becomes part of the craft. Now, when we turn to the box office, the conversation changes from artistry to survival. A film like this enters theaters carrying both promise and risk. On one hand, the nostalgia of a beloved animated classic ensures curiosity. On the other, the strangeness of its premise, a misfit alien rendered in live action, could alienate as much as it invites. Yet what happened was extraordinary. The film resonated across demographics. Children delighted in the mischief, adults found themselves moved by its themes of grief and chosen family, critics praised its willingness to embrace darkness alongside comedy. The result was a phenomenon. Crossing the billion-dollar mark, the film proved that audiences crave not only spectacle but sincerity. Its success at the box office was not despite its strangeness but because of it. People saw themselves in its outsider, felt their own fractures mirrored in its imperfect family. And word of mouth carried it further. Reviews praising its authenticity, parents discussing its honesty, young viewers finding solace in its celebration of misfits. This communal embrace transformed it from a risky remake into a cultural moment. Yet box office numbers, though impressive, tell only part of the story. The deeper truth is what those numbers represent. That audiences are willing to pay not just for fantasy but for resonance. That in a time when franchises dominate, a story about love stitched from chaos could thrive. The financial success is itself symbolic. It suggests that tenderness can compete with spectacle, that sincerity can triumph over cynicism. What fascinates me most is how the film's filmmaking techniques and its box office fate mirror each other. The techniques embraced imperfection, accidents, strangeness. The box office rewarded it precisely for that. In a way, the market validated the philosophy of the story, that even the strange, the broken, the misfit can belong. So when we talk about this film critically, let us not separate its craft from its reception. Both tell the same story. The cinematography's oscillation between grandeur and intimacy mirrors the box office's ability to attract both children and adults. The sound design's blending of chaos into harmony mirrors the way critics and audiences eventually agreed on its power. The editing's shift from chaos to tenderness mirrors its financial journey from risk to triumph. Art and commerce, usually at odds, walked hand in hand here, both insisting that love, even when messy, is worth embracing. And perhaps that is the most beautiful insight, that filmmaking techniques are not just tools and box office numbers are not just statistics. Both are languages of resonance. Both tell us when a story has pierced the collective heart. And in this case they tell us that the world was ready to hear this tale again, that it needed to hear that family can be chosen, that monsters can be loved, that even chaos can be tender. A film lives through its story, yes, but it also breathes through the people who carry it to the screen. To talk about this one is to acknowledge not only the characters but the actors behind them, their voices in interviews, their laughter and hesitations when describing what it meant to live inside this world. And beyond them, there are the audiences, millions of hearts stitched together in darkened theaters, whispering their own responses. To explore these dimensions is to realize that cinema is always dialogue, never monologue. The casting of Alison Brie as the weary, resilient older sister was inspired. Known often for her sharp comedic timing and her ability to slip between humor and ache, she brought to the role a tenderness that never dissolved into sentimentality. In interviews, she spoke of the exhaustion she felt not just on screen but in her own body during filming, long days under heavy skies, moments when she questioned whether she was doing justice to the weight of her character. That vulnerability bled into her performance. Watching her, you see not a polished heroine but a woman stretched thin, who somehow refuses to give up. That is not just acting, that is lived truth slipping through craft. Dave Franco's involvement carried its own curiosity. Wearing the dual role of producer and performer, he embodied someone on the periphery of the central family yet essential to the film's ecosystem. In interviews, he often spoke about the strangeness of juggling meetings about budgets with scenes that demanded emotional rawness. It gave him, he confessed, a deeper respect for the precarious balance between art and commerce. His presence added another layer, an actor whose off-screen life with Alison Brie haunted their on-screen dynamic. Audiences sensed this, even when characters did not directly overlap. It was an intimacy that could not be erased. The younger actors brought their own kind of magic. Child performers have a unique challenge, to act while still carrying the unself-conscious energy of childhood. Here, the little girl at the center felt less like a performance and more like a revelation. Interviews revealed that much of her authenticity came from freedom. The director allowed her to improvise, to speak lines in her own rhythms, to play rather than perform. Audiences felt that honesty. Many reviews singled her out, noting that she carried the story's emotional core not by being perfect, but by being real. And then there was Stitch himself, a creature embodied by layers of puppetry, animatronics, and digital artistry. Though not an actor in the traditional sense, Stitch demanded performances from a team of puppeteers whose work went largely unseen. In behind-the-scenes conversations, they spoke of cramps from crouching for hours, of laughter at malfunctions, of the peculiar joy of breathing life into something mechanical. Their dedication gave us a character who felt tactile, unpredictable, alive. It is easy to forget them, hidden in shadows, but they are as much part of the cast as anyone. Audience reviews revealed just how wide the film's impact stretched. Parents wrote about crying alongside their children, surprised by how deeply the themes of grief and belonging resonated. Young viewers giggled at the chaos but later whispered about feeling seen, as if Stitch's strangeness mirrored their own. Critics, too, responded with a mixture of admiration and surprise. Some noted that it was darker than expected, more honest than typical Disney fare. Others argued over whether its strangeness was a strength or a risk. But the conversation itself proved its impact. This was not a film that slipped by unnoticed. It demanded engagement. One of the most moving patterns in audience response was the way people claimed the story personally. Reviews were filled with sentences like, "I felt like the girl," or "Stitch reminded me of myself," or "My sister and I saw ourselves here." This personalization shows the film's real achievement. It ceased to be just a remake and became a mirror. Every audience member saw their own outsider, their own grief, their own chosen family reflected back. That universality disguised in specificity is what great art achieves. In cast interviews, a recurring theme was gratitude. Gratitude for surviving storms during production, gratitude for the chance to tell a story so intimate on such a large stage, gratitude for audiences who embraced imperfection. Alison Brie spoke about being approached by young viewers who said they felt less alone after watching. Dave Franco described his shock at seeing box office numbers climb, realizing that what had begun as a risky project had become a cultural touchstone. Even the puppeteers, often overlooked, expressed wonder that their unseen labor had moved so many hearts. Critics debated, as critics always do, but their debates themselves highlighted the film's richness. Some praised it for refusing to sand down its rough edges, for leaning into chaos rather than sanitizing it. Others wondered if its darker tones made it too unsettling for children. But this tension, between laughter and unease, between chaos and tenderness, is exactly what made the film memorable. The fact that it divided opinion at times is proof of its power. Forgettable films inspire no arguments. Resonant ones spark dialogue. Perhaps the most telling audience insight is that many viewers left the theater speaking less about spectacle and more about emotion. They did not gush about special effects or box office numbers. They spoke about family, about grief, about feeling chosen when they felt unworthy. They carried the film home in their conversations, in their silences, in the way they hugged their loved ones tighter afterward. That is impact no statistic can measure. So when we speak of cast, interviews, and audience reviews, what we are really speaking about is the dialogue between creation and reception. The actors poured their vulnerability into performances. The crew stitched chaos into coherence. The audiences received that gift and answered back, not with applause alone but with recognition. That circle, artists speaking, audiences responding, both changed by the exchange, is what makes cinema sacred. And so, my dear friends, we arrive at the end of our journey together. We have wandered through beaches and broken homes, through the chaos of mischief and the tenderness of unexpected bonds. We have looked behind the curtain, listened to the whispers of themes and symbols, and sat quietly with characters whose flaws felt uncomfortably familiar. And now, as the credits roll, not on the film alone but on our conversation, I find myself reflecting on what it all means, on why this story matters enough to hold us here so long. The beauty of this film lies not in spectacle, though it offers it. It lies not in nostalgia, though it calls upon memory. Its beauty lies in its insistence that love is messy, fragile, and yet more powerful than anything the world can muster against it. It whispers that family is not about perfection but about presence. That monsters are not those who look strange, but those who refuse to see love where it exists. That grief can wound us, yes, but it can also create the soil where new bonds grow. These truths, told through laughter and chaos, are truths we carry into our own lives. When I step back and think of all we've uncovered, plot unfolding in waves, characters stitched together in contradictions, production haunted by storms and accidents, themes pulsing with defiance and tenderness, I realize the film has given us more than entertainment. It has given us a mirror. It has reminded us that we, too, are outsiders at times, longing to belong. That we, too, live in homes patched together with love and weariness. That we, too, transform when someone chooses us despite our sharp edges. It has reminded us that love, when chosen, is the most radical act of all. What lingers most for me is not the chaos, not the spectacle, but the image of a family, unlikely, imperfect, fragile, standing together anyway. That image is simple, almost understated, but it carries the weight of everything that came before. It says we survived. We stayed. We chose one another even when the world said we should not. And perhaps that is the lesson for us, sitting here long after the lights have dimmed, to choose one another again and again, no matter how strange, no matter how broken. For you, my fellow lovers of literature and film, I hope this exploration has reminded you why we gather around stories in the first place. Not to escape, though escape can be sweet. Not to be dazzled, though beauty has its place. But to be reminded of ourselves, to be unsettled into recognition, to find, in the face of an alien or a child or a weary sister, some reflection of our own searching hearts. That is the gift of art. That is the reason we return again and again to these tales. And so, as I close this chapter with you, I invite you to carry the story beyond this screen. Let it echo when you look at your family, when you reach for friends who feel distant, when you see someone who seems strange or out of place. Let it remind you that belonging is never about fitting perfectly but about choosing to love anyway. Let it remind you that even monsters can be tender, that even chaos can be holy, that even in grief, something new can bloom. Thank you truly for walking with me through this journey. If this exploration has touched you, if it has sparked thought or memory, I ask you gently, stay connected. Like this video, share it, subscribe if you wish to keep diving with me into the strange, the poetic, the layered worlds of cinema. Not because numbers matter most, but because community does, because every click, every comment, every quiet presence here reminds me that I am not speaking into silence but into a circle of friends who love stories as fiercely as I do. Until next time, my friends, keep watching, keep reading, keep feeling. For stories are not just things we consume, they are the maps by which we find one another, the threads by which we stitch ourselves into something larger than loneliness. And as this film has reminded us, even in the wildest chaos, even in the strangest bonds, love endures. And that, at the end of it all, is the only story worth telling.